Body Bags with Joseph Scott Morgan. Today we're going to hop back in the Wayback Machine. And the reason we're going to do this is that, well, it's a significant anniversary. And it's significant in the sense that it changed the course of lives all around the country. And even it changed the course of how forensic medicine is practiced. Today we're going to tell the tale of two brothers that died within a decade, less than a decade of one another. And one brother was arguably subjected, his body was, to the worst forensic autopsy that had ever been performed, particularly in a high-profile case. And jumping forward just a few years later, another brother, his brother, dies. And arguably the finest, most highly detailed autopsy that has ever been conducted on an individual of this stature was performed. Today we're going to focus on the autopsy of Robert F. Kennedy. I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bags. Dave, I've often wondered over the course of my career and covering cases, what the nature, what it felt like that night back in 1968, June the 5th. Where we're in a time in our country where it seems like it's coming apart at the seams. We've had many of those instances since then. I think that we kind of live in times that are not too dissimilar from that right now. Total chaos. And you've got one person that kind of burst on the scene that maybe might offer people some hope, sense of peace, maybe. And right before our very eyes, right before the nation's eyes. And this is not like John F. Kennedy, where,
right.
The Zapruder film was held back. This is something that was, in living color, where it came out pretty quickly afterwards. We had a lot of witnesses to this event.
Well, Joe, you got to remember a couple of things. In 1968, June 5th, 1968, Bobby Kennedy, he was not the front runner for the Democratic nomination, and he was the hope of the younger generation that was really, this is a year after, if you're going to San Francisco, put flowers in your hair with Scott McKenzie. It was 4.5 years after the assassination of JFK. And we're only talking 2 months after the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. So there was a lot going on in our world, protesting the war, protesting the government, protesting everything. And to see Bobby Kennedy shot down, murdered while he's on the campaign. Remember, the one of the most important things we see is Bobby Kennedy, RFK, in the Ambassador Hotel when he says, "On to Chicago." They just won the California primary. He was not favored to win the primary in California, and he did. And so it just, you and I were talking about this before we started today, and his campaign just, man, it was like they hooked a rocket to it when he won California. It was a big deal. And there was a lot going on at the Ambassador Hotel. Now, you have, thankfully, been able to look at the autopsy. And you mentioned in the opening, when I encourage you to go back and listen to the Body Bags episode about John F. Kennedy's assassination, because the autopsy is just, it's despicable to think that our country did that to a president in his death. The autopsy of Bobby, though, considerably different.
Yeah, it really is. I've thought about this. I know, and I'm going to give a big shout out here because I owe him a lot. My buddy Julian Dory, I've appeared on his podcast, I think, twice. Big reveal. I've got another one coming up this summer where I'm going to be rejoining Julian. But the second time I appeared with Julian, we did an entire JFK episode strictly about the medical legal, and of course we did body bags, Dave, as you have stated. Probably by far my favorite episode on body bags. But I was able to sit down with Julian. I think we went for, how in the world I did this, I have no idea. I think I talked for like 3 hours about JFK. But there's so much to unpack.
There still is.
There really is. And I don't necessarily look. I entertain everything. I read the book Chaos not too long ago. I'd seen it on, and several of these other things, that talk about Manchurian candidates and all of this. But it was me, as we always say on body bags. I'll never flee from this, by the way. We always have to return back to the science, don't we?
Right.
There's a lot of speculative stuff that has always existed. And if it's like going into a laboratory in science, if you don't follow the steps along the way, if you're trying to analyze something, if you're trying to create something, you cannot stay within the rules and expect a reasonable outcome. And reasonableness, I think, is one of the things that you're hoping for, right? It's not either a negative finding or a positive finding. It's, did you stay within the parameters? What is it of accepted practice? And reflecting back now, I hate to use the word celebrated. We marked JFK's the 60th anniversary back in 2023. And reflectively, going back to, even transporting ourselves back in time to JFK, there was an acceptable standard. I think people think that people in 63 were still using whale oil lamps, and, conjuring up, we need to bleed you in order to get the negative humors out of your body. That's not the way it was. I mean, we had modern medicine back then. We had an understanding of wound ballistics. We had just come off the biggest war in the history of mankind, arguably. We understood ballistics, okay? So you can disabuse yourself of this idea that we were still in this kind of very primitive stage.
Well, Joe, I'm glad you brought that up, because I want to point one thing out, friends, and that is we've talked about how the medical legal profession, how it's grown, how forensics has grown by leaps and bounds since you started professionally.
Oh, yeah.
But when you look at the assassination of JFK, then Martin Luther King Jr. and RFK, I want to point something out. It was comedian Dick Gregory who actually used tape recorders at his performances to improve himself. And he was at a stage of his career where he was gaining a lot of popularity and fame, and he was taking a very active interest in politics. And Dick Gregory, the day of the assassination, November 22nd, 1963, he noticed that he started taping. He had like tape machines going in the living room, bedroom, every place he had a radio or a TV on different networks. And he was taping what was being said so that he would have he knew how big it was, and he wanted to document what was going on. But something he picked up as he was listening to this all day long, the coverage of the assassination of JFK, the stories changed. The same people being interviewed, their story changed. So you've got people that are being interviewed within an hour of the assassination taking place in Dealey Plaza, and 5 hours later on another network, a totally different story from the same people. And that's where Dick Gregory, I know we talk about JFK because it actually has bearing on RFK. Because
it certainly does.
Do you know where the assassination of the Zapruder film, the showing, which, by the way, we've never seen the complete Zapruder film because the government cut segments out of it. They edited that. Can't explain why, but it was edited. Anyway, do you know where it was first shown? It was on a show that had Dick Gregory as a guest. It was on Geraldo Rivera's late night show in the mid-'70s called Good Night America.
Yep.
And it was on that show, which you can find on YouTube, where the Zapruder film was played for the very first time. And people who believed in the idea that the Kennedy assassination was done by Lee Harvey Oswald acting alone went, oh my gosh, it doesn't fit.
Yeah, I know. Yeah,
And that
you're
was
right. I got to
12 years
tell you,
later.
I went back. Two things I went back and did. Um, First off, you've mentioned the Gregory appearance to me before
Hmm.
on Geraldo's show,
Right.
and I think I had seen it prior to that. But friends, if you have not seen this, I strongly urge you to go back because you get in real time the
Oh, yeah.
reaction from a pristine audience that has never been exposed. I mean, we're kind of jaded now because we've
Hmm.
seen, in that one frame
Right.
where the president's head comes apart, right? They've just passed
Mhm.
that sign, rather,
Yeah.
not the overpass, but the
And that's
sign.
where that's where the film had been cut too, by the way.
And you can see his head, just kind of, well, these people, it was 77, right? Dave, I think 77 or approximating
75,
that.
actually. I
Yeah,
think it's
okay,
75.
75.
Hmm.
You can, I know that Rivera he says something, he alludes to the fact that you're about to see it for the
Oh,
first time.
warning. Big
Yeah,
time
warning.
warning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you're experiencing this with this crowd, this first
Oh,
collective group of people, of regular citizens that bear witness to this. And trust me, they didn't have even the monitors within that studio. They didn't have the ability to see it like we do now, where
hmm.
it's super enhanced. Even back then, where they're looking on an old bulb monitor there,
Hmm.
and the president's head comes apart, and you can hear them all collectively,
Yeah.
draw a breath. And I think there's a scene where they cut to the audience. There's people with their heads
Oh,
buried,
yeah.
and they're shaking their head. And if the scar wasn't deep enough already, it was further enhanced that night. And from that point on, people begin to have their suspicions. Not that they hadn't already, but this is kind of a further reinforcement from
Right.
physical science perspective, I think, where people were actually asking questions. And I'm not talking about people that sit alone and, kind of
Right.
ruminate all. I'm talking about people that were housewives and people that were plumbers and people that it never caught their eye. And they didn't realize how deep the wound was until, and I mean that metaphorically,
Right.
until this is burst on the scene. But you know who else out there saw the problem with all of this? The film, the autopsy itself, the examination that followed. Well, that person plays a key role in the autopsy of RFK because he knew what had happened at the autopsy of Robert's brother, John F. Kennedy. And we're going to talk a little bit about him. Brother Dave, there's an elderly man still with us.
Oh,
I can't believe he is, but he is. And I'm referring to Thomas Noguchi, still alive,
oh,
well over
wow.
90 now. Uh, Supposedly, still spry. Um, Once known as the coroner to the stars. He wrote two books. I recommend them to everybody. One is just called Coroner. The other one is called Coroner at Large. If you really want to get an insight into the world that he inhabited, regarding working in L.A., and doing autopsies on people like Belushi and Marilyn Monroe,
Hmm.
Sharon Tate. He was actually physically present at the Tate LaBianca murder scenes. And so
Now, I
just,
didn't know that. I did not
yeah,
know Noguchi was there. I knew about the Belushi because I remember I asked you about it
yeah,
on the Belushi autopsy when he held his arm up and squeezed because he wanted to
yeah,
see if he could find where the needle
yeah, the
marks
needle
were.
puncture wounds.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's
Wow.
the
That was
milking of the
Noguchi.
arm is something that we use. And there's something that I teach my students that I learned from Dr. Noguchi in reading one of these books. And I think it was at the Tate scene. His idea was, and this seems so counterintuitive, but
Hmm.
this gives you an idea of the way his mind works. Okay. As a death investigator, you think that you're going to walk onto a scene and immediately you go right to the body. I don't know if it is Dr. Noguchi's kind of Zen-like Eastern mentality that's so different from the Western mind, but he understood something that I wish every investigator that works death cases understands. He purposefully never looked at the body at a scene until the last moment. He always cast his eyes up, he said, because it's human nature to focus on the body and you lose context for the rest of the environment that you're in. And Dr. Noguchi, he put forth the idea that if you look up and kind of work your way down side to side 360 degrees, if the body is concentrically in the center of the room, you just kind of look around, then you never lose context for the biggest bit of evidence that you have. Isn't that interesting?
Wow.
And yeah, and so I actually
It
use
makes
that
sense.
with my students when I'm teaching them. Like, because it's so easy to get distracted by the body. Because
Wow.
you're kind of chomping at the bit, you're outside the tape, maybe you finally make it in and you rush to the body to begin to do all these things.
But Joe,
We kind of do it already. We do measurements. Yeah.
This drives me crazy because, you and I talked about the destruction of evidence at a crime scene. In particular, out in Idaho where they tore the house down before there was any kind of a trial. And even I was shocked. And now talking about Noguchi not looking at the body until the very last thing after getting all of those points of reference so that you can actually do your job to the best of your ability. It makes perfectly good sense, which now tells me, why would you ever destroy the crime scene? Why?
Yeah, I don't know. And some we have sins of omission and sins of commission, right? And so, you begin to think about, why. And of course, you and I hate the why question because it's generally why is unanswerable most of the time. What I think is like, what the hell were you thinking?
Right.
It's kind of is a better question.
Well, all right. But getting down to RFK and the situation, so we can get this set up because Robert F. Kennedy had just won the Democratic primary. He's speaking in the ballroom of the Ambassador Hotel.
Yep.
He's speaking to 1,800 to 2,000 people. He is supposed to go to another small gathering of supporters, people who've knocked on doors and hung flyers to, hey, thank you, and cheering on the troops. That was the plan when he took the stage at the Embassy. Now, before he gets on the stage in the ballroom, there was a private meeting in a suite, I think it was 519 in the Ambassador Hotel. These are 30 to 40 people that were celebrities, media personnel, and some of his most valuable contributors financially. Met with them first after the victory, then goes down to thank everyone in the main ballroom. Now, he was scheduled to go to another ballroom where another group of people was waiting, where Bobby would once again stand there and say, thank you. We got more to do, just a brief appearance. That was the plan. But plans changed. After he's on stage in the main ballroom and comes off, he is told, no, we're not going to the other ballroom right now. We're going to take you to an impromptu press conference. Now, the media was all around. The media had been upstairs in the suite. The media was with him. They loved RFK. And now there was no need to have an impromptu press conference. Go say thank you to the people who got you the primary win. But there was a guy named Fred Dutton who was working the campaign out in California. And it was Fred Dutton who said, no, we're going to the press conference. And that's the guy that scheduled the path, Joe. The path from the ballroom through the kitchen to the pantry of the Ambassador Hotel. This was not something that had been scoped out ahead of time. It wasn't part of the plan. But that was what the impromptu press conference caused to happen, that Bobby Kennedy was going to be walked through this kitchen area where there's 30 or 40 workers, kitchen workers, who had no idea that RFK was coming through because it was never a plan.
Well, this, man. Dig this. I found this interesting. Bobby's actually shaking hand, referring to him like I know him.
Yeah.
Senator Kennedy is actually shaking hands with a busboy.
Yeah.
The moment he shot. All right. Can I say one name to you real quick?
Please.
And you're going to know the name as soon as I say it. Rosie Greer.
Yep.
Um, and the reason I'm
Oh,
saying, rest in peace, Rosie,
yeah.
but the reason I'm saying this is that just a few years earlier in Dallas, right,
Hmm.
we saw what happened with Bob Kennedy's brother. Okay. And he had a whole team of people with him.
Hmm.
All right. Secret Service personnel, all this stuff. And I know he's the president. But when you've got a person that is what they refer to in security as the body person, is
Hmm.
Rosie Greer, former NFL player, played for the Rams, one of your favorite teams of all
Yes,
time.
he was my
Um,
hero. I love
a
Rosie Greer.
big man,
Yes, he
huge
was.
man. I'd be intimidated by him.
Who did
And
needlepoint and
yeah,
sang in the
you would
choir.
want that wall in front of you, but God bless him, he plays football. He's not he's not a person to be there to vet the crowd. And you get you get these other people that are surrounding and kind of swirling around his environment. Davis, pure chaos. And not only is it chaos, this is a turkey shoot.
Yes.
Okay. Because if I were to have to plan some type of event like this, a fatal event like this, um, this is a choke point. This is an environment that I would want I would want the target to come into. First off, you've got proximity. You've got
Oh,
access. You don't have dude, you don't have to prove anything. You don't have to prove who you are in this environment. Can you imagine today if you went into an area like this? First off, it would be completely sanitized, I think.
phew.
You'd be
Yeah.
surrounded by a wall of
Yeah.
folks. And the fact that they drug him through there, he's got this family history.
Yeah.
It always, and I know it does to you. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but
No.
it feels, there's something about it that just feels completely off.
Yep.
And again, I don't want to hear anybody say, well, it was a simpler time back then.
No, it
No, you
wasn't.
just had MLK
Yep.
executed, just weeks earlier, literally two
Yeah.
months, whatever it
Yeah.
was. And then, beyond that, you had John F. Kennedy, and not to mention all the other violence that was going
Oh
on in
my
the country at
gosh.
that point in time. How can you be so out of touch, with a security situation like this?
Joe, one of the things that, and I'm glad you pointed out that do not think of this as a simpler time because there was security. There was a plan. Thing is, that plan got pushed aside. But here's something else. I want to go back to something we said a few minutes ago about the Zapruder film on Geraldo's Goodnight America. It was the airing of the Zapruder film that brought about the congressional hearings on assassinations. I don't
Yeah.
know how many of you remember this, but there was a well-funded congressional committee put together to look into the possible conspiracy into the deaths of JFK, MLK, and RFK. All right. Those three assassinations were after the Zapruder film was aired for the first time 12 years after the assassination of JFK. And after years of people going, how was it possible that Martin Luther King Jr. could be killed at the Lorraine Hotel? How is that
Yeah.
possible? How is it possible that RFK got rerouted into the kitchen when
Yeah.
that was never a plan? How is that? And people actually were standing up in the mid 70s saying, enough's enough. Look
Yeah.
into this. And they did. And if you remember, those hearings did take place. And one of the big hearings that came out was an auditory specialist that came in
Mm.
on the JFK detail. It was a
Yep.
motorcycle microphone with
Mike has
police.
been left open. Yeah.
Yeah, it was locked in place and you could get the sound of gunfire. There was a huge debate about this, but here's the thing. This happened 10 years after RFK's assassination,
Yeah.
and 14 years after JFK. And they're having these meetings with people who were still alive from both of those times. That's, important to note. But do you know what the hearing came up with? What their end result was? That
So,
we needed a well-funded committee that the probability is that a conspiracy existed in each of those assassinations and each one needed to be examined further, that it wasn't Lee Harvey Oswald acting alone. It wasn't James Earl Ray acting alone, and it wasn't Sirhan Sirhan acting alone in the Ambassador Hotel, June 5th, 1968. That's what the congressional hearing meeting, they came up with, that was improbable. But even now, all these years later, that's what we're left with. So we're not going to open up the conspiracy window. That's already been opened, and it's part of the public record that y'all can go and look up for yourselves. What we are going to do, and I'm so thankful that Joseph Scott Morgan can do this, because do you know how many times Bobby Kennedy was shot? Do you know how many other people were wounded? And by the way, Rosie Greer, head of security for Bobby Kennedy, along with Rayford Johnson, author George Plimpton, author Breslin, they jumped on Sirhan Sirhan, but it was Rosie Greer that tackled him. Imagine that. And yet we've got shots. We've got injuries, Joseph Scott Morgan, that seem highly improbable that they came from where Sirhan Sirhan was, in the kitchen pantry of the Ambassador Hotel. Is that correct?
Yeah. And, and listen, just to frame this out from the forensic pathology standpoint, Dr. Noguchi doesn't say, and he even alludes to this at one point in time, that he never says that, Sirhan Sirhan is holding the weapon and firing the weapon. As a matter of fact, he alluded to at one point in time, he said, I never said, and you can look this up for yourself, don't believe me, I never said that Sirhan Sirhan fired the fatal blow, fired the fatal shot, and I'll get into that in just a second.
Yeah.
So I never said that. All I'm merely stating as a forensic pathologist is that there was a fatal shot that was fired, and here's the nature of it. All right. And he talks about this. One of the conclusions that Dr. Noguchi drew, and I have to say they did extensive testing, Dave, which is kind of fascinating now, that these were almost within, a couple of these are like within contact range. And, Dr. Noguchi even talks about the residue that's left behind. And you're only going to get this deposition, on a surface if the weapon is fired within inches. Because if you think about, I like to compare it to like talcum powder. When you fire a weapon, stand by 1 second.
What are we looking at, Joe? What are you showing me right now? Are you threatening me?
No, I'm not threatening you, brother. So this is a weapon that we use to train with, with fake scenes. It's not real. It's just a toy.
Yeah.
And this is not representative of the weapon that Sirhan Sirhan used, but it is a handgun, representative of a handgun. He used a revolver, an Ivor Johnson 22 caliber revolver.
Okay. Before we move forward, for those who don't know the difference between a revolver and one that holds a clip.
Yeah. So this has got a spot for a magazine right here, and a revolver has a cylinder on it. So Sirhan Sirhan's weapon had a cylinder, and it held 22 caliber long rifle rounds, as opposed to standard or shorts. And it was not a Magnum. Magnum is the higher end of 22 caliber weapons. But I just want to do this, kind of give you an idea. If this is the end of the barrel, the muzzle, right? So when a weapon is fired, you have this cloud that comes out of the end of the muzzle. So you've got smoke, you've got debris that's caught up in the barrel, particularly if you have a dirty weapon. And you also have unburned powder, that comes out scorching hot, There's a bit of flame that comes out at the end of the muzzle. So the closer you are to your target area right here, the higher the probability is you're going to have deposition of this. So the further you move away from your target spot, the powder that comes out, it's not very, what's the term? It doesn't have a lot of aerodynamicism, It's not like a projectile that's coming out of the end of the barrel that's spinning, You're talking about powder. So that's why I said like talcum powder, what happens is as it's discharged, it blows and it drops away pretty quickly. So you have to be really close to the target in order to get this deposition that deposits. And they call it, a term that I love that they've used for years and years is called tattooing. And what this means is that those little grains, those unburned flecks of powder, they actually get beneath the skin. And so you'll see these little dots all over that area. Well, in order for that to happen, you have to be at very close range. And what Dr. Noguchi put forward is the fact that when this weapon is discharged, it's within inches of Bobby when it's fired. And they're all fired from the rear. And give you an example, the fatal wound, Bob Kennedy actually had a round that he took in the cervical spine. Okay. That's not the fatal wound. The fatal wound is actually if everyone will reach behind your right ear, right here, okay, you'll feel, and you go directly backwards, there's a lump that you'll feel on the surface of your skull right there. That's your mastoid bone. Okay, it's this real prominent bone. Mm-hmm. Males, it's generally bigger in us. We're kind of robust bones.
Thought we were all the same.
Women, it's a bit more dainty back there. It's called gracile. We'll talk about that at some point in time when we talk about a case of forensic anthropology. But suffice it to say that the round actually entered right here. And so It's behind the right ear. And it hit with such force, Dave, that the round actually essentially fragmented upon impact. But here's something that people don't know that happens when you take shots to the skull. Did you know that the bits of skull, the bone, actually become projectiles? And so when Bobby was shot, that round created a defect right here, and it knocked a hole in the mastoid process, and it blew not just fragmented lead projectile remnant in there, it also blew bone fragments in there as well. So it creates this kind of cavitating, it almost, see, how can I say this? It kind of fans out a bit, creates kind of like a little cone. And as it goes out, it's disrupting more and more tissue along the way. His surgery lasted hours. He was not pronounced dead, until the next day. Mm-hmm. He lingered. He lingered for a protracted. They thought there might be a chance to save his life. Of course, this is obviously every area of our brain is critical, but the deeper you go into the brain, the survivability, lessens. Okay. And so that's what they were looking at here. But all of these rounds that Senator Kennedy was hit with, this total of three wounds that he's got. And he's got one that goes into the armpit that doesn't do a lot of damage. Cervical spine injury. And then of course, fatal injury is up here. This thing's unsurvivable. But it's important to understand that not only were they able to draw some conclusions about the range of fire, they were also able to draw some conclusions regarding survivability or lack thereof. They were able to conclude that what they needed to do was do further testing and verify all of these issues surrounding ballistics that otherwise, particularly in the case of JFK, were never confirmed. Dave, I'm going to throw a name out to you. I don't know if you'll remember this person's name or not. It's okay if you don't, but I'll remind you. The name is actually Dr. Earl Rose. Do you remember that name?
Oh, I do. I know who we're talking about, but it's only because of the JFK show that we did.
Yeah, Dr. Earl Rose was actually, I think, the first board-certified forensic pathologist that they had ever had in Dallas. Okay. Dr. Earl Rose is the one that got pressed against the wall by the Secret Service and said, no, president's body's coming with us. We're taking the body back east, right?
Wow.
Even though Earl Rose was a board certified forensic pathologist. And interestingly enough, he was actually officed, Dave, in the same area at Parkland as the emergency room was in. I mean, he's like right down the hall. So when the president was brought in, Dr. Earl Rose, who's a forensic pathologist, actually stuck his head in. He was actually there in real time. Can you imagine that?
Oh my God. Best, most qualified person in the country.
Yeah.
So take a look at these injuries, and
well,
they're
certainly,
like,
yeah, and certainly in the state of Texas and in Dallas that day, you've got a board, and they're saying no,
we're going to kidnap the body and illegally fly it back to Washington, D.C. and see if we can find the most incompetent people in the country to actually do the autopsy on the president of the United States.
Yeah, we're going back to Bethesda with it. Not only are we going to put this, this man's autopsy into the hands of three of the biggest incompetents on the face of the planet, we're going to make a circus out of it. And we're going to have unknown, untold numbers of people in the room, in the autopsy suite. And we're going to do an ineffective job of doing the assessment. We're not even going to look at the clothing that the president, that had been removed from the president's body. We're not even going to take a look at it until months after the autopsy has been performed.
So bad.
That's the group of clowns that you're talking about. And these people had never done a forensic autopsy. Down the road, though, there's an interesting fellow that was working at the time. It was called the Armed Forces Institute of Pathology. And this gentleman who was actually in D.C. And came up to Bethesda, but they did not wait on him, is a guy named Dr. Fink. And he, this is the height of stupidity. This guy was in charge of ballistic studies, and he was a forensic pathologist, and they didn't call on him until the last minute, till these other two people had their hands on the president's body and were trying to make sense of all of these injuries.
Unbelievable.
But here's who else was watching. It's Dr. Tom Noguchi. The world of forensic pathologists is a very small world, okay? Forensics in general is a very small world, particularly back then, even though you got people that are calling themselves a forensic this and a forensic that and all of that. Back then, rare as hen's teeth. So Dr. Noguchi said, this is not going to happen with Bobby Kennedy. Let me just kind of give you an idea, Dave, as to who was present. And there's one key part to this I want you to be aware of. So Dr. Noguchi is actually the prosector. He is actually the autopsy physician. He's the guy in charge. He had an aide who worked as the agency point of contact, that was a representative of the coroner physically there. He had two other forensic pathologists that were deputy coroners that were there, Holloway and Liu. He had a board-certified radiologist standing by, Dr. Scanlon. Stand by. I'm getting there.
Yeah.
The neurosurgical team that worked on Senator Kennedy, 4 of them were present. Okay. He actually had another pathologist that was a clinical pathologist that worked in the hospitals, Good Samaritan Hospital, Kernan. By the way, just so everybody understands, when Bobby was removed from the ambassador, he was taken to Good Samaritan Hospital. Dave, get this, his body never left Good Samaritan. They did everything in-house. So there was no, we're going to put him on a plane, we're going to casket the body, we're going to fly the body. No. It was done there. Noguchi had seen what had happened. So he invited, and they flew, Dave. They flew from D.C. He invited Dr. Fink. Remember the guy?
Yep.
That was the ballistics guy. Had him show up.
Wow.
Okay. Also had Dr. Stahl show up, AFIP. Had Dr. Kenneth Earl, who was a neuropathologist from they all flew from D.C. or from Bethesda, that area, to L.A. to be present for this autopsy. You had a myriad of other people that were specifically there. But here's the person I really want you to focus in on. They actually had a guy, and in Dr. Noguchi's autopsy report for Bobby Kennedy, unlike JFK, you know how the pathology assistants and everybody, there were people coming and going out of there. We didn't know who was there.
Right.
Dig this. Noguchi was so bright about this. He had a guy in charge of security of the autopsy room. That's his
Wow.
title.
Oh my gosh.
Charles Maxwell, he's the chief of investigation division. And so he's physically there, taking names, observing everything. So they locked this down. When they took the samples from Bobby Kennedy's autopsy, including the bits of bone fragment that they had recovered, they took his brain that they had already sectioned. And when we section a brain at autopsy, we bread loaf. It's called serializing the brain like this. They take the whole thing after they've done that, physically walk it to the radiology suite, and they all stand by and watch these images being taken, Dave.
Wow.
That's how on target they were, no pun intended,
right,
with everything with this case, because they were not going to fail in their assessment of these injuries, because it had failed so miserably relative to Dallas and what happened to the president's body. Now, that brings us back to the ambassador. Okay? It is not as easy, load these many years later after JFK's assassination, to manipulate and control what's going on as it was with him. Okay. Now they have command and control over the body and collection of that evidence. As a matter of fact, they even went out with the same weapon, Dave, in the ballistic section from Los Angeles County Crime Lab. Guess what they did? They took that weapon and they fired it into deceased pig ears.
Wow.
To get an idea about deposition of the gunshot residue.
Wow.
Just to formulate this thing just over and over and over again, because unlike Lee Harvey Oswald, okay,
mm-hmm.
there's going to be a trial in this case. All right. There's going to be a trial. And, they've hooked Sirhan up. Yeah. So from the forensic side of the house, they really locked this thing down and were able to integrate themselves into control of all of the evidence, documentation of the evidence. And this is all because of Dr. Thomas Noguchi.
It's just amazing to me that one person, and you and I preach this, be in the moment, know what you're doing, because one person can make a difference. And the reason we're able to talk about the assassination of RFK and the autopsy with such certainty is because of one man, Thomas Noguchi, who set the standard for how this is going to be done and how we're going to do it. And now we're looking at it all these years later, and we're able to go, you now know so much about what happened with RFK that it's documented, and you can explain it. You can explain the injuries. I still want to know how Sirhan was able to get that close to Bobby Kennedy with a gun and shoot him from behind when he was standing in front of him. I can't figure that out, Joe.
Yeah, and this is interesting, Dave. We had talked about this before, that people, according to the eyewitnesses they had, stated that they never saw Sirhan within 2 feet. Certain people did, and they focused on this in the investigation, within 2 feet of Bobby Kennedy when he shot. So if you can't explain it that way, if you can't put the gun in his hand, even though you can see there's actually this famous image of them having his hand pinned down, they're removing the weapon. These guys are crawling all over him. So is it possible someone else could have been in that space firing a weapon? I can't answer that question. I know that they were able to wrestle him down. And Dave, there are a couple of things that have floated around over the years, relative to this, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, a lot of people have put forth this idea that there was a second shooter down there.
Well, okay. Well, Joe, the reason that comes out, it's twofold. But one, we have proof through the autopsy that RFK was shot 3 times, but 5 other people were also wounded.
Yeah.
They were shot. So you've got at least 8 shots being fired. You have RFK being shot behind the right ear, as you pointed out to us earlier. That was the kill shot, behind his right ear and within 2 feet. Now you've got Bobby Kennedy on camera going through there. Tell me where it happened. Show me the shot, because we should be able to figure this out. But we also have, Joe, we've got markings in that pantry area of bullets that didn't hit anybody. So we're not playing conspiracy here. We're just laying out the facts of the case and why the congressional hearing, the committee on assassinations, said we need to investigate these as probable conspiracies involving more than one person. But still, you mentioned there was a trial. Sirhan was convicted. He says he doesn't remember anything about the event, by the way, even to this day. And there are plenty of shows that deal with conspiracies, and if that's your thing, go ahead. I'm fascinated by the facts, because the facts of this case lead me to believe there's more to it than just Sirhan.
Well, here's the thing: is that the round? Okay, so that the rounds that are fired, right? This is coming from what's called a 22 caliber revolver.
Right.
It's manufactured by a company called Ivor Johnson. I don't think Ivor Johnson's in business anymore. Anyway, the model of this weapon is called a Cadet. If you've ever watched old police dramas and you see detectives, they used to be called detective specials. And that's generally a 38 special weapon, something that, in old television shows, you'd see them holstered on their side, or maybe even in a sling, a shoulder holster rather, beneath their arms. 38 caliber. It's a snub nose. It's very tiny, and it's meant for shooting within proximity. Some people refer to these types of weapons as pocket pistols, vest guns, belly guns. It's something that's easily concealable and easily acquired. It's got a fixed iron sight on the front of it. You're not going to shoot it. You're not going to use this to defend yourself at 100 yards. Okay. This is something that you're going to utilize if you're within just several feet of subject, like street crimes, those sorts of things. And it would be easy to get this thing in there, but the weapon itself only holds 8 rounds. Bobby is hit with 3. There's an additional one that passes through his jacket. So that's a total of 4, right? That have some kind of contact with Bobby. You've got the round that actually strikes him, this fatal round. Remember, we talked about the mastoid. You've got another round that enters in the armpit and passes kind of forward beneath the chin like this. So it hits right armpit. His arm would be kind of if you raise position, fires through here.
Not a fatal wound, though.
Yeah, no, it's not a fatal wound. It exits out. Now, you can account for that. Maybe did it strike somebody else? We're talking about 5 other victims. There are some people that have estimated or have thrown out a number, now get this, of up to 13 rounds being fired. And you've got multiple witnesses that say that there could have been, they heard 12 shots. And isn't that interesting, though? Because you're in this, I think when you and I were speaking earlier, we were, I talked about this kind of funneled area.
Right.
And the way the noise, kind of plays off the walls, you got people that are going to scream. Okay. So that's going to be factored into what your, at least auditory perception is. You might not actually see it. I mean, how many times have you ever been in a crowd of people and you might hear somebody say something, you might hear a scream in a crowd, and you won't necessarily see it, but you'll hear it, right? I can't tell you how many Mardi Gras parades I've been to over the course of my life. where there's all kinds of screaming and hooting and hollering going on. I've been adjacent to fights that I never saw happen. I heard fights.
Mhm.
I've heard people being hit and punched and all that, but it doesn't mean that I witnessed it, right, with my own eyes, but I've heard things. And so you've got this kind of cacophony that's going on in there. Um, what can they prove and what could they disprove? Because, in forensics, the positive findings are just as important as the negative findings for us. We want to know what's present, what's absent, those sorts of things. What kind of conclusions can we reach, Dave?
The amazing thing is that after all these years, where we did have a remarkably well done job with the autopsy of Robert F. Kennedy, we have the congressional committee saying we need to have a full investigation, fully funded by the United States government. And by the way, it needed to be done by 1980. It's never been done.
Yeah.
There has been no full-on investigation of the assassination of John Fitzgerald Kennedy, Martin Luther King Jr., or Robert F. Kennedy. It's right here is what we have. So, not playing a conspiracy game, just looking at the basic facts of what took place that night. Seems odd that you could have an assassin in place at a moment's notice for a route that was never planned, for
Yep.
a place they were never planning to go through at the last minute, just before midnight on June 5th, 1968. But that's where we are. Robert F. Kennedy was alive for 14 hours after he was shot. He succumbed to his injuries. The one thing I remember, I was a very, very, very young child at the time. I do remember my mother listening to a radio report and saying, I hope he lives.
Yeah.
Because they were reporting that it wasn't fatal yet. It wasn't. There was that, because of what had happened with JFK. And I just remember my mom saying that. My mother, by the way, was a conservative. So it was just something from her heart. She didn't want the Kennedys to go through anything else. It's just enough. And that's what a lot of Americans were feeling at the time.
Yeah. It's a burden. It's a burden that I don't, at this point in time, that none of us can, at least in your generation, we can't fully appreciate what those adults back then were bearing witness to. But we carry the scars of this with us everywhere we go, because these events, these three events, these three assassinations, we'll have to do a separate one at some point in time where we talk about MLK's assassination. But these things have marked us, right? And so the one upside to this that I can say, if there's any way we could ever memorialize the actions of Dr. Noguchi, that just like in all pursuits in science, you learn from your mistakes. In this context, it marked us in practice, I think, as to how we would handle cases moving forward in the future. That we were not going to be dominated in our assessments relative to what the findings should be, or what people want them to be. And that's the whole goal when it comes to medical legal practice and any kind of practice within forensics, is that the science will always lead you to the truth. Now, you take that science and you do with it as you wish, but the assessments that were made by arguably the most renowned forensic minds at that time, as a matter of fact, on a closing note, one of the people that actually consulted on this case that Dr. Noguchi actually lists in his autopsy report is Dr. Russell Fisher, who wrote this book, Spitz and Fisher. We talked about the passing of Dr. Fisher not too long ago. We did a memorial episode about some of these guys that have passed. Guess who else is mentioned in his autopsy report? One of my great friends and people that had a big influence on me, and that's Cyril Wecht. Cyril Wecht is in this report, Dave, and the guy that directly mentored me, that I was thinking about the time the times that I spent in an autopsy suite with this man over the years, and to think that he's named in this autopsy report, and I sat at his feet and learned from him, Dr. William Eckert, who was consulted directly by Noguchi in this moment in history, and these huge minds in forensic science. It marked our practice in forensics. It marked a way forward for us. I hope that these are lessons that we have learned from, of how to do things and how not to do things. Because guys, let me tell you something. In this life, you come around mountains every now and then, right? And good Lord above will either allow you to keep going around the same mountain, or he'll show you a way over the top of it. Hopefully, we've learned how to go over the top of it and moved on so that we can be better in our practice. I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bag.